Utpatti Prakarana, The Origin, Chapter 9, The Story of Lavana, Part 1. A Sufi saint who was a very hard taskmaster had 3 disciples. All of them respected their master, but with an element of fear. Once he called his disciples and told them that he would clarify their doubts the following day. They were quite happy as they had so many doubts. Next day, at the allotted time, they sat in front of their master, who looked at the first disciple. The disciple got up and asked, "Master, how can I free myself from the torturing thoughts of the past?" The master looked into the eyes of the disciple and ordered gravely, "Ask the question closer to home." Meekly, the disciple sat down without understanding the significance of the command. After a while, the second disciple got up and asked, "Master, what will I get if I sincerely and diligently practice what I have learned from you?" Again, the master looked into the eyes and thundered, "Ask the question closer to home." The third disciple was at a loss to know what to ask and was panicky. But he got up when the master looked in his direction and asked humbly, "Master, what do you mean by asking a question closer to home?" For the first time that day, there was a smile on the face of the master. He said affectionately, "I thought you would never ask. By question closer to home, what I mean is that question which is relevant, which affects you immediately, and that which can transform your life." Looking at the first disciple, he observed, "You are interested in asking about the past, which is gone and no longer relevant to you. Moreover, by dwelling on it, you only strengthen it. And you," he continued, looking at the second disciple, "are interested in things yet to come, which only helps in intensifying your fantasy and the tendency to move away from the reality that is already slipping from you." Then, looking at everyone with affection, he said, "What I meant was to ask such questions which have bearing on life at present. How is my mind behaving at the moment? Is my body tensed or relaxed at the moment? What is happening to me when fear grips, for I have to ask a question closer to home at the moment?" Such questions have always definite answers. Remember, to see far, one has to see what is near. The difference between the Western philosophy and our cultural thought is that the Western philosophy has mainly contributed to speculative thought and hence may be called as the armchair philosophy, while the Eastern thought in general and Indian culture in particular has been more practical, connected as it is with day-to-day life. This does not in any way mean that Western philosophy was of no use to human growth. Through philosophy, man has learned to ask questions, to doubt, and to seek answers to those questions. These form the essential steps of knowledge to improve the human lot and, more importantly, to make the ordinary man into a thinking human being. Every branch of knowledge or its application has had its origin in philosophy. And interestingly, with the introduction of experimentation, the sciences started parting from philosophy. If one were to classify the questions into types, one finds that there are only 2, the whys and the hows. The whys led to speculations. Why is this universe created? Or the purpose? Why is there so much variety in the creation? Why do we die? Etc. The list of such questions is endless. The myriad of answers got generated in the human thought according to the milieu, geographical or cultural. This stream of questions gave way to the man's observation of the surroundings or the outside. The questions, beginning with how, became more interesting as they directly affected our day-to-day life. For example, these questions become the basis of human power of invention, which has given us technology. Even from the point of view of abstract thought, the answers discovered are of use to us in our day-to-day life, as explained in the story on the questions closer to home. More stress is given on the questions beginning with how in the Eastern thought. For example, how does one become angry? How does one die? Or how can one die? This led to a revolution in its direction of human thought. This led to a revolution when the human being started observing himself. It led man to the inner search, the science of spirituality. The search outside became an objective search, and the search inside the subjective search. We should in no way take the Western quest to be purely materialistic and the Eastern as purely spiritual, because it is quite obvious from our deplorable condition at the present that we are poor materially and more so spiritually. Our incorrigible lethargy is the main cause for our downfall. Material progress demands hard work, while the spirituality demands harder efforts, sharper wit, and stronger awareness. Nation as a whole, we resorted to consolatory philosophy that helped in justification of our laziness. By quoting scriptures, we chose escapism while conveniently neglecting Paurusha or the effort. The scriptures like Upanishads and Yoga Vasishta keep stressing that the human effort is of primary importance without which nothing can be achieved. If we just take a cursory glance at places like Varanasi or Haridwar and Rishikesh, we find innumerable people in ochre robes of sannyasi. Among them, there might be only a few who can be counted on fingertips who are genuine seekers. The rest are only in quest of their daily bread and shelter. However, we should not blame spirituality or renunciation for this sorry plight, as even a devil can quote scriptures to justify its acts. A seeker has to become aware of one of the most important facts of spirituality, which is not to have blind faith. Fortunately, the present times are such that it is very difficult to have any blind faith, as everything is shrouded in doubt. But this is an apparent fact for most of us, as the present trend seems to point out. For example, in spite of the fact that we doubt everything, we believe many things if they are pointed to us through our blind spots. There is a wonderful episode from the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. Once, in presence of Sri Ramakrishna, a man started praising the Bhagavad Gita to the skies. This would not have been surprising had any other man done it, but the man was known for his critical attitude towards everything that was Indian. So Vivekananda, who was then Narendranath, was a little surprised at the change of heart. When he left, the disciple commented on the change of heart in the gentleman. Sri Ramakrishna smiled and observed that it is not surprising at all. He said that probably the man had come across a copy of the Bhagavad Gita translated by an Englishman. But Narendran was not a person to take anything for granted. So he followed the gentleman and found that he was carrying a book, which was a copy of the translation by Charles Wilkins, with a foreword by Warren Hastings, the first Governor General of Bengal and the founder of British rule in India. This particular episode gives an insight into how the great master had felt the pulse of the intellectuals of this country. Subsequently, Swami Vivekananda decided to go to West for addressing the so-called educated Indians from the Western platform. Even today, we are not very far from that situation. For many of us, the news published in newspapers is very authentic, although they may be misrepresenting, exaggerating, or even scandalizing the truth. Similarly, we have certain scientific superstitions, that is, whatever is explained in the name of science. So a seeker has to guard himself or herself against taking anything for granted, but at the same time, the questions asked should not be only for gathering information, which becomes only a spiritual gossip. All along, the question should be only for silencing the mental activity. Questions like these lead us to a fruitful quest. One such person who asked a fundamental question that transformed his life was Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi of Tiruvannamalai, South India. He has described it in his own words. It was about 6 weeks before I left Madurai for good that the great change in my life took place. It was quite sudden. I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health. But a sudden, violent fear of death overtook me. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, and I did not try to account for it or to find out whether there was any reason for the fear. I just felt I am going to die and began thinking what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor or my elders or friends. I felt that I had to solve the problem myself there and then. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, and I said to myself mentally, without actually framing the words, "Now, death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? The body dies." As I sat and at once dramatized the occurrence of death, I lay with my limbs stretched out, stiff as though rigor mortis had set in and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to inquiry. I held my breath and closed my lips tightly so that no sound could escape, so that neither the word "I" nor any other word could be uttered. "Well then," I said to myself, "this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground and there burnt and reduced to ashes. But with the death of the body, am I dead? Is the body I? It is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality, even the voice of I within me, apart from it. So I am the spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit." All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truth, which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something very real, the only real thing about my present state, and all the conscious activity connected with my body was centered on that I. From that moment onwards, the I or self focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. Fear of death had vanished once and for all. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. But such questions and the subsequent mood of quest happen only to a microscopic minority, while the rest of us overlook over our own capacity to seek due to our indulgence and involvement. Some of the most common questions asked by us are, why this creation? And when did this creation come about? But the same questions can be used for starting a quest by replacing why with how. How is this creation brought about? Because this very question gives birth to another and more relevant question. How do I perceive this universe? This forces the seeker to examine himself, his own mode of observation, and the experience of the universe. Utpatti Prakarana answers this question very minutely. We experience the external world through our senses housed in a body. Information so collected by the senses is accepted or rejected, analyzed, understood, and remembered or forgotten by different functions of the mind. But all this is possible only with the entity called I, which is the governing faculty of all functions. And in a way, there is no creation without this ahankara or I. Which brings us to a logical conclusion that the creation of the universe for the individual is the creation of I. The obstinate habit of getting involved with the gross and superficial world as experienced through the senses is due to the loss of awareness of the reality, which happens to be the very basis of existence. This has been illustrated through the stories in this prakarana so far. The present sarga or the chapter, which is the conclusion of this episode, sheds further light on the finer aspects. In this prakarana so far, sage Valmiki has tried to hint at the fact that Dvaita or the otherness stops us from experiencing the reality. This Dvaita is the outcome of the manifestation of I-ness and its progenies, which give the outward direction to the consciousness. For making the consciousness flow inward, it is necessary to eliminate the vrittis. This can be possible only with a mind which is free from all fluctuations. The tree of Maya flourishes out of the seeds of chitta vrittis or modifications of the mind. And these modifications or the fluctuations are at various levels: body, senses, manas, buddhi, chitta and ahankara, which are to be tackled at the respective levels for achieving the quiescence. The methods to eliminate the modifications are followed by different schools of yoga, which have long tradition of transfer of knowledge through a line of preceptors and disciples. Yoga Vasishta, however, gives a broad and general outline which is applicable to any school. It says that panacea prescribed by the wise for the removal of the disease of the mind can be found very easily by mind alone. Those who are freed from the longing for objects are able to avoid them easily can be called human beings, while the others who are still under the influence of the basic hunger for the sense objects are at best worms in human garb. If the mind is divested from the sankalpa or I and directed to the Atman, it can be turned back. Like one iron shaping the other iron as hammer and anvil, pure mind of a person should mold his impure mind. In a mumukshu, the pure aspiration strengthens his effort and helps him to abandon the restless activity of the mind. Gradually, when the activity becomes quiescent, Brahman, the ever-shining principle, is experienced. The general guideline has 4 aspects: Shama, sweet patience; Vichara, or contemplation or contemplative analysis; Santosha, or contentment; and Sadhusanga, the association of experienced wise. These are the necessary aspects common to all the methods used to quieten the mental activity.